Good morning. Please take a seat. Buongiorno. Morning. Morning. Good morning, Federica. And Federica Falchetti has developed her dissertation on behalf of humanity for the sake of the states, UNESCO World Heritage Program, and state patrimonialization policies, a comparative anthropological approach. And I leave the floor to your tutor, Professor Fabio Mugnaini, and then after to the co-tutor, Professor Giovanna Pizziolo. Thank you. If you want to say a few words.
Yeah. Thank you, President. Thank you, colleagues, for assisting to the graduation of Federica Falchetti, who is presenting a dissertation on a quite crucial topic for the anthropological contemporary activity. The anthropology of cultural heritage has faced a decisive turn toward the patrimonialization, toward the heritage policies that are led by the UNESCO initiatives and that have been growing within the World Cultural Heritage Program. The dissertation that Federica is presenting is resulting from her activity of a student of public and cultural diplomacy. And this is the first of the positive remarks that I would like to share with the colleague of the Commission, given that it will be easy recognizable in the reflection of Federica, the good blending of the various disciplines that she met during our course. The dissertation is divided into several chapters and is composed by one introductory chapter rewriting and rephrasing the full history of the UNESCO's Cultural Heritage Program, taking into account the growing critic literature that has been produced from several perspectives, either juridical or anthropological, basically, given that the teaching that is tutorizing the dissertation is the anthropology of cultural heritage. And the critical approach has been thoroughly examined, also pointing to the documents, pointing to the textual production of the UNESCO's procedures, stressing the evidence of the crucial role that the state members have been playing and are continuously playing within the UNESCO's praxis, notwithstanding some general principles that had been making the base for the ethic results of the UNESCO's program, to build a kind of global international peace fair into acting on the minds of the people was the general end. But in the praxis, in the practical steps, the role of the single state member has revealed to be crucial because of some norms or some guidelines, and because of the possibility that this kind of rule set leave to the state to act for different purposes than those that are aiming the UNESCO's program. This is the starting point for a comparative analysis, and comparison is the main anthropological tool. The comparison set together 4 cases, 3 of them coming from states that are rather present in our chronicle because of more or less aggressive or important nationalistic cultural policies. So Albania, Turkey, and Hungary that will be that have been analyzed by Federica Falchetti, locating into each one of these states' history the actual cultural policies that will be under analysis. The fourth case comes from our nation, from our Sicily, and from the place that have been studied by the Italian anthropologists who founded, we can say, who founded the anthropological turn toward the heritage policy. Bernardino Palumbo worked on the eastern Sicilian Barocco area, where the global result of acceptance of the Barocco Valley into the World Cultural Heritage has been somehow by the local resistance, showing that even if the state as entity, as a subject, has the last word, making possible the starting of the nomination procedure, the communities still hold some resilience or some resistance possibilities that bring us to the last, let's say, to the last perspective out of the dark, that is given by the role of community stressed by the Faro Convention and stressed by the present initiative that UNESCO's program has set in order to overcome the problems of this state versus global perspective dialectics. I will not say anything more, but because I would like that Federica presents the comparison and the four cases. Just adding for the colleague of the Commission that as far as I can consider, the dissertation has been written in a very plain way, in a very detailed and precise way. So I want to share the pleasure of having played the role of tutor of her works. Please.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have to lean? No. Okay. They can hear me. Okay. So first of all, good morning to everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your words, Professor, for your introduction. And I have chosen to talk about 4 different case studies. Actually, the first 3 case studies are more focused on analyzing the way in which the states take advantage of the powers given to them by the UNESCO conventions, in particular the World Heritage Convention and Intangible Heritage Convention, in order to, they exploit these powers given by these conventions to pursue actually quite different objectives in respect to those who actually are supported by the conventions themselves. In particular, these states, I have analyzed Albania, Hungary, and Turkey, use heritage as a symbol, as an icon for nation building purposes, and use it to act on the ground as a form of governance on the ground, as Valdimar Hafsten, a famous scholar, said. And they use heritage even to expropriate the local bearers, the bearers of that same heritage, those who have lived on a territory inscribed on a UNESCO lists for centuries, those who have transmitted their intangible heritage from one generation to another for centuries. And unfortunately, the UNESCO conventions leave spaces to the states to act in this field, to use heritage for different purposes, in particular for political purposes. And the first case study that I have analyzed is Albania, as I said. In this case, Albania has used the UNESCO awarded heritage, in particular an archaeological site, the site of Butrint, to pursue specific nation building purposes, but directed outside from Albania itself to the international scenario. Because as we know, Albania was under, for decades was under the rule of a communist regime by Enver Hoxha. And when Albania came out from communism, it was a very isolated country in any sense, from a political point of view, but even from an economical point of view. It was completely isolated, and it needed to rebuild itself in some way, its identity, its economy, its society, to rebuild itself as a democratic society, and also needed legitimization from this point of view. So for all the post-communist governments in Albania, even those governments that at the beginning were actually composed by the same communist nomenclatura that before composed the communist regime, and then the socialist governments that came after a crisis in 1997, all these governments, although being very different from each other, and even very unstable, I would say, they all pursued the same kind of cultural policy, which is a policy trying to bring Albania as close as possible to the European Union. Why? Because clearly post-communist Albania sought to be admitted in the main international organizations, and among these, of course, also given the geographical position of the country, the European Union was the main international intergovernmental organization present in the area. And being admitted in this organization could be useful both for economic purposes, but also for other purposes, because being admitted, a very young democracy as Albania was at the time, being admitted in the European Union, with the European community, then the European Union, which is perceived globally, let's say, as the house of democracy, could represent a strong source of legitimization for the new governments. And for this reason, Albania chose to candidate as its first element in the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1991, as soon as the communist regime fell with the new elections, actually, chose to candidate this archaeological site, the site of Butrint, because Butrint is presented in the nomination file, which clearly has been written by the Albanian state, so it perfectly reflects the vision of the state in this case. It is presented as a real microcosmos of European history. The document says that Butrint has been inhabited actually since prehistorical times, but the fact, it is stressed the presence of the of a Greek colony, which made Butrint a polis. Only this word recalls an idea, the idea of democracy, an idea which in some way is very rooted in Europe, in the European way of life in some way. And it is also stressed the fact that Butrint, for example, was a Roman colony, and then it was occupied by the Byzantines. So it hosted a bishopric, so the presence of the Christians. And then it was occupied by the Venetians. So this recalls the Mediterranean Europe, the history of the Mediterranean world, which is in some way part of the identity of nowadays, above all, Mediterranean Europe. And this site for this, it was chosen exactly because it was able to convey such kind of messages. It was able to say to the European countries, Albania is like you, is similar to you. We share the same past, we share the same roots, we share the same religion even. But this, of course, even came at a cost, because nowadays a good percentage of the Albanian population is still Muslim, and for centuries Albania has been inhabited and in some way shaped by the Muslim presence, because for centuries the Muslim presence in some way influenced art and culture and the language of Albania. So it cannot be really ignored But in order to pursue this political purpose, bringing Albania closer to the European Union in order to foster the admission of Albania into the European Union, which is actually, I mean, still nowadays this is not true because it has still not been accepted in the EU. In order to pursue this foreign policy objective, Albania neglected a wide percentage of its own population and even ignored the fact that the Greek minority in Albania has been in some way discriminated for decades and is still subject of a policy of assimilation, while on the other hand, the nomination says that the Albanian heritage in Butrint seems to be the very core of the site. The second case study is Hungary. Hungary, on the other hand, used heritage to pursue a policy objective aimed at its own population, its own domestic public, a nation-building purpose, actually, because Hungary, to leave the regime change, above all, a sort of a second regime change, because of course there was a shift between communism and democracy, and then there was a second shift since 2011 when Orban came to power. And he slowly transformed Hungary from a liberal democracy to a self-declared illiberal democracy. Orban in some way needed to justify this change of power in front of its own people. And in order to do this, he presented himself as a sort of a savior of the homeland. He said that he would have brought back the whole Hungary, which means a Hungary based on traditional values, Christian values, and a Hungary in some way that could recall a past greatness that, according to his party, Fidesz, had been watered down, let's say, by the admission in the EU, even if, of course, Hungary is still part of the EU after all, but had been watered down by the admission in the EU, by globalization, by migrations, and so on. And in order to do this, in 2011, the same year in which Orban came to power and approved the new constitution, the fundamental law, an element was candidated to the Register of Safeguarding Practices, which is a sort of a branch, let's say, of the Intangible Heritage Convention, which is the Tanchaz. The Tanchaz is actually both a physical place, because it can be translated as dance house. But it is also an intangible practice, which is the practice of learning and teaching and practicing traditional Hungarian folk dance and folk music. And this practice is interesting, in my opinion, because it is able to, first of all, to recall perfectly the kind of values that Orban tried to define as the fundamental ones in Hungary, as those values that Hungary should have in some way, should bring back in some way. Yeah. And why? Because first of all, the Tanchaz is very famous, still in Hungary and even abroad among the various Hungarian communities. And it recalls a series of, it recalls a society that does not exist anymore, because it recalls a rural, idyllic Hungarian peasant society, let's say, in which there were clear and well-defined gender roles, and even the dance itself is a dance in which the male leads and the female is led in some way. Even if we analyze even the movements of this dance, it is clear that there is a paradigm of gender domination on part of the male. And it was perfect to try to bring back into the present and reiterate as normal something that actually belongs to the past, that is not present anymore. And secondly, this is quite, the second reason for which the Tanchaz was candidate is a bit more, maybe complex to explain. because the Tanchas, being it is characterized by folk dance, folk music, so it is a memory of the past, and it has been cultivated mostly by communities of Hungarian people that nowadays live outside Hungary, the diaspora, because Hungary was split in many different pieces, actually, after the end of the First World War with an infamous treaty for the Hungarian population, which was the Trianon Treaty. This treaty was imposed by France, by England, the winners of the war. And this treaty has been infamous for the Hungarian population because it reduced the old Hungary to 1/3 of what it once was. And the people, the Hungarian people that found themselves under the government of other countries, for example, in Transylvania, which is nowadays under the Romanian government, the Hungarian communities were persecuted for decades. And they held onto these traditional dances and music as a form of resistance, after all. And candidating the Tanchas, first of all, is a way for Orban to say to these communities, you are important to us. We want you back with us. It's a form of, let's say, watered down irredentism, a diplomatically acceptable irredentism. But it is also a way to say, I, Orban, we, Fidesz, will not allow anymore the European country, what the European countries did in the past to us. Because according to the narrative proposed by Orban, nowadays, the same countries that in the past had imposed that infamous treaty, nowadays are those who are imposing migrations, who are imposing globalization, and who are those who are robbing Hungary of its own resources, because the liberal government, the pro-Western government that Orban in some way, to which Orban succeeded, was very close to these countries and had sold the Hungarian natural resources to foreign investors. So, candidating this element, which appears to be as a lively dance and so on, actually hides very strong political stances. And then the last case study, it's not the last, but it is the last when we talk about the power of the state on local communities. It is Turkey, of course. And I left this case for last because it is, it sends the strongest message, in my opinion, because this case really is able to show how far the state can go if it only wants and if it only is aware of the power that the UNESCO conventions afford to hit in submitting the local, in subduing, in silencing and manipulating even the will of the local communities, if it only wants. And the case of Hungary derives, Turkey, actually comes from the fact that Turkey too lived another regime change, actually since 2002, when Erdogan came to power with his party, the AKP. And slowly Erdogan transformed Turkey from a lay state that had become after the Kemalist revolution into a state in which political Islam was at the very core of the nation. And in particular, only one kind of political Islam was the one legitimized as the official one for Turkey and its people, which was Sunni Islam, in particular Hanafi Sunni Islam, which is, let's say, it is the kind of Islam that is practiced by the majority of the people, or at least this is what the state says, in Turkey. And for this reason, any minority, above all those apparently Muslim minorities that did not conform to this kind of Islam, were considered a danger, a menace, a threat. And among these communities, there were the Alevi. The Alevis are undefinable because the state, of course, says that they are Sunni Muslims. They are a peculiar folkloric group of Sunni Muslims. On the other hand, they have a very different vision because some of them even say that they are not even Muslim at all. Because after all, they do not practice the 5 pillars of Islam. They do not go to the mosque. They do not have an imam. For example, their only and prevalent form of devotion is a ritual, which is called Sem ritual. And this ritual is composed by various. The culmination of this ritual is a dance, which actually is a prayer, which is the Sema. And the Sema was, in fact, nominated and inscribed in the Intangible Heritage List in 2010. Why? Clearly, why was it chosen? Clearly because, in this case, this is different from the cases that I've said before, that I have analyzed before. Because here, heritage, in those cases, heritage was used for political purpose, and then there were consequences. In this case, heritage was nominated exactly to trigger those consequences, which are consequences on the bearers, on the Alevi themselves. Because nominating and inscribing heritage, the Sema, the Alevi Sema, in the Intangible Heritage List, meant, first of all, to regiment the community of bearers, because once a heritage element is inscribed, the responsibility falls on the state, and the kind of narrative which is accepted is the one presented by the state. And in the official documents, first of all, the Sema is not presented as a religious element. It is presented as a folkloric, mystical dance. Secondly, it is a way to regiment the community itself, because the Alevi themselves are described as a folkloric Sunni group, and not anything else. Third, it is a way to regiment even the places of worship, because the Alevi do not go to the mosque, as I said. They have a specific place of worship, which is the Semevi. But once a heritage element, like the Sema, which is practiced in the Semevi, is nominated and inscribed in the list, the Semevi, being the places in which that element is practiced, fall under the responsibility of the state. So the Turkish state now even controls the Semevi, denies to the Alevis the permits to open the Semevi, builds mosques very close to the Semevi. So it is a complete expropriation, a dispossession, as Valdimar Hafsten said. The Alevis were deprived of any influence, agency. They were even deprived of the possibility of interpreting, of giving a meaning to their own heritage. And what really actually shocked me is that the Alevi communities, in the Intangible Heritage Convention, the communities of bearers have to give their informed consent through a document that is presented, however, by the state. The Alevi communities were betrayed by the Turkish state because they were invited to a conference. They signed what they believed to be a participantship, but actually they were signing the letter of informed consent, and they didn't know. In fact, during that conference, when the domination was discussed, none of those communities actually agreed with what the state proposed. But their signatures are present in the official documents presented by UNESCO. And this is the result of a research conducted by a scholar that is Bahar Khan, it was enlightening for me. And then there is the last case study, which on the other hand is a sort of, in my opinion, it is a source of hope, let's say, because the last case study, which is the Baroque cities of Val di Noto, as Professor Mugnaini said, shows, and I mean, this was inspired by the work of a very important scholar that is Berardino Palumbo. This last case study shows how, I mean, no matter how state really tries to silence the local communities, and I mean, the local communities are silenced, they are victims in many cases. But in many cases, they also continue to act on their heritage, to have an agency on the ground, because materially they are the ones who are there, who practice heritage, who live on areas inscribed in the World Heritage List. So they are there, they stay there, and they try to resist. I mean, this is not only, I mean, in many cases, the state also tries to involve the local communities. I mean, not all the cases are negative, but in many cases there are problems for the bearers, and their agency that often still persists on the ground and disappears in the shift from the local to the national and above all to the international level, because the state becomes the only spokesperson able to talk on behalf of the community. This agency becomes visible again if we use an anthropological and ethnographic approach, if we look at what happens on the ground, if we take a closer look, as Palumbo, for example, did. And the case of the rock towns of Val di Noto shows that the local communities are able, first of all, to influence the nomination itself, because the original nomination of Val di Noto included only a few towns, and many towns were excluded not because of state decisions, but because of centuries-old rivalries existing on the ground. But mostly, and then the nomination was opened to more towns. In fact, nowadays they are eight different towns, not because of a state decision, but because the local towns that had been excluded fought and mobilized different levels of the Italian political sphere in order to be included. Just an example, Berardino Palumbo focused this research on one town, which is Militello in Val di Catania. Militello in Val di Catania originally was excluded from the nomination, but the current president of the Sicilian region, which is Nello Musumeci, was born and raised in Militello in Val di Catania. So the local community mobilized its political levers, let's say, mobilized the fact that some of its citizens, one of its citizens in particular, was so powerful at the regional, national level in order to be included in the nomination. This proves that the agency of the local communities is not non-existent after all and can be manifested. And lastly, I mean, the Baroque heritage is presented in the nomination dossier as something very clearly identifiable and very, something with a clear interpretation. But if we look closer, we see that no matter how much the state tries to hide the local dynamics, because they could be considered disruptive for the kind of concept, even it's very vague, for the kind of concept that UNESCO itself has of the community as the very monolithic base of any human society. No matter how much the state tries, the local heritage is still dynamic, is still in constant reshaping. Because the local, for example, even in Militello in Val di Catania, but I'm sure that this is true for even for the other towns, maybe at a lesser level, but heritage is still at the very core of processes of manipulation and different interpretations that still have an influence on the daily political, religious, social life of the people that live there. So heritage is not is not given, it is always made and constantly remade.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for. We need to move the microphone. Thank you for your presentation and very interesting topic. It would be nice to discuss more, maybe outside in the sun. Yes, because there are many. Of course, the UNESCO program has been criticized, and of course, it is from many different point of view. It probably promotes something, but on the other hand, it also highlights very serious problems in different countries, belonging, engaging with the community, but also how these sites have been identified as your case studies demonstrate are sometimes highly critical. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if Giovanna would like to.
Yeah. Just, I will add a few words also because Federica explained very well the core part of her thesis. I really agree with Professor Mugnaini about the very positive evaluation of your work. Very well done, very well structured. I can see that the structure of the thesis is conducted in a way that the reader can easily make comparison in a very objective way about the reasons, the topic you expose, and that it's very important, as Professor Mugnaini already stressed, the comparison in this case, it's very, very important in order to better understand. And also, your work reflects very well, I think, the didactic program that we established with this public and cultural diplomacy course, because you take the good parts and, let's say, very, very good competence in different disciplines. So as far as I know, that from the archaeological side, you were able to extract the main points, for example, for the Butrinto case studies and understanding all the variables that are included in the management of an archaeological site. That is not so easy to understand. And I think that it reflects also very well this complementarity between tangible and intangible heritage that we are often, that somehow, sometimes we try to distinct, but they're really, of course, they're really linked. I can say that starting from, let's say, for example, prehistoric case studies that are very far from all the problem related to the identity linked to the idea of nation, of country, but they have some link that we can still get and use to understand better our cultural relationship of today. And I would like to stress also the role that you gave to the concept of cultural landscape. And you, I think, use very well also the analysis of the buffer zones related to these sites that have, I think, that can open us the possibility to work in a different way with the local communities. That it's the main actors, as you stressed very well. And I really appreciated also your analysis of bottom-up and top-down approaches. You were very able to identify the consequence of these different approaches. And we can, for example, make a list also of, let's say, the negative side of this UNESCO list related to the necessity to have a very blocked and very steady concepts that do not fit with the process of going on with the cultural heritage, as you stressed, and as the professor underlined a few minutes ago. And so, yes, I think, for example, there are some keys that could be used in positive or negative ways. It's the idea of, for example, of authenticity. No, you can use this word in different ways. So you stress that it has been used in a negative way, but could be also done in a different way. And just putting another note in terms of your formation process that you follow here in Siena. I think we could reflect a bit more on the role of the experts, because at the end, we are preparing you and your colleagues to become behave as experts. What, let's say, an expert that is aware of all these things you are written in this thesis can work? I think it's a very big question. Yeah. But we have to think about that. It's something that is also related to your future somehow. So let's say that the last chapter, the one on the Faro Convention, make me breath with a little more of relax, because the first chapters, you read it and feel a bit oppressed and say, oh my God. Instead, the last chapter, it's very important. So Faro Conventions, we could try to use this convention at best, and you as future experts could have an important role, I think, if you are interested in this process, that it's really a mix between cultural and political aspects of heritage. So yeah, you have done a very, very good work. I really appreciated it. It's also very well written. Don't want to use more of the precious time of the commissions, but we can go on this topic, I think, whenever we like.
Okay, thank you, Giovanna, for your comment. Now, if you don't mind leaving the room just for a few minutes so that the... oh yeah, I didn't ask, but because we're all... are there questions from Marco, from Andrew, or Federico?
Could I just ask one question?
Yes, please, Andrew.
I thought it's fascinating from a cultural diplomacy point of view, in particular how Albania and Hungary use it as a tool of cultural diplomacy. Fascinating. Hadn't come across this before, but I just wonder, when you talk about the state in all four cases, who were the key players here? Was it the Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Foreign Affairs? To what extent was the cooperation between these different state actors? Did you go into that in your thesis, Federica?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Essentially, we are talking about ministries. For example, in the case of, there is a very interesting case in Turkey. In Turkey, the management, well, let's start with a very short introduction. In Turkey, there is the Ministry of Cultural Heritage, and then there is another ministry which exists since the Kemalist Revolution, which is the Diyanet. It's called Diyanet. It is the Ministry of Religious Affairs. In the case of this UNESCO element, the Alevi Sema, only the Ministry of Culture and Tourism has been involved, and not the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And this has been one of the reasons for which I said that the nomination, the UNESCO nomination, desacralized the practice, because everything has been managed by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and still nowadays the administration of the Alevi Sema, the administration of the places of worship, the Semevis, falls under this ministry, while the Ministry of Religious Affairs has not even been slightly involved. And this is interesting, because in Turkey, this ministry, which is the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the Diyanet, as I said, is very powerful. It's very powerful because for decades, since the Kemalist revolution, religion in Turkey had not been erased, had not been separated from the state. It was a state competence. It was subdued to the state. This means that if we consider the fact that the Alevi Sema has been managed by the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, this proves that this element, once inscribed in a UNESCO list, has been deprived of any sacrality, because otherwise it would have been managed by the Dianet. So yeah, in general, we are talking about ministries. In the case of Italy, it is a bit different because the Sicilian case, it is a chaos, actually. The Baroque towns are, and what composes these towns is administrated by a variety of institutions that is incredible. There are the religious buildings that are administrated by the church, but there are 4 different curias. Then there is the Ministry of Internal Affairs that practically manages some of the buildings. Then there are the 8 municipalities. Then at the regional level, there are 3 different superintendencies, because the 8 towns fall under 3 different provinces, Siracusa, Ragusa, and Catania. And then there is the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, because it manages the entirety of the site since it has been inscribed in the UNESCO list. Then there are the municipalities. And then there are the private actors, because many Baroque buildings are owned by privates. So it is a chaos, because the competencies overlap and no one really knows who manages what falls under the competency of who. So it is a bit difficult to understand who really has the upper hand. But we have to say that in the Sicilian case, Sicily is an Italian region with a specific constitutional stature. So what usually is competence of the state, because usually at the Italian level, cultural heritage is a competence of the state, of the UNESCO Commission in Italy. In the case of Sicily, being a region with a special constitutional stature, it falls on the region itself. The region delegated this competence to the superintendency of Siracusa, and the superintendency of Siracusa had to inform all the other 2 superintendencies, Catania and Ragusa. However, this communication to the superintendency of Siracusa came very late, and at that moment, the local municipalities had already decided nearly everything about the nomination. So it is a very peculiar case. And in the case of Hungary, it is a competence of the Ministry of Culture, but Hungary nowadays is a very centralized state. Everything is an appendix of Fidesz and Orban's will. So the Ministry of Culture is not really much independent or autonomous in respect to the government. And then in the case of Albania, it is the Ministry of Culture. And then practically on the ground, there has been an association, let's say, which has been founded actually by foreign investors, by Lord Rothschild, which was the Butrint Foundation, and administrated Butrint formally until 2013. And then everything was left to the ministry. And then, to the Butrint National Park, because since 1999, Butrint was expanded, the buffer zone was expanded. It was also, of course, a diplomatical way to say we are back after the crisis in 1997. In 1999, there was this new socialist government. It decided to expand Butrint, to use it as a sort of crown jewel of Albanian heritage. And there was the creation of the Butrint National Park that since that moment administers on the ground the local communities of the park itself.
Okay, thanks very much. That's very good.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. And Federica and your guests, if you can please leave the room for a few minutes and then we'll call you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the commission, maybe you can silence this. I will silence this room and we can move into the other.
So I suppose we shift to the other room now, right?
Yes, we shift in the other room. If you can just put silent to your microphone and camera. Well, Ms. Federica Falchetti, given the results of your academic career, this commission has approved your degree with an evaluation with a score of 110 out of 110 cum laude, and plus we would like also to confer you a special honor. In Italian is convenzione. Difficult to translate this in English. We are a bit redundant compared to the English version. Therefore, by the powers conferred to us by the Chancellor and in the name of law, we proclaim you Dottore Magistrale in Public and Cultural Diplomacy. Congratulations. And no, we cannot shake hands. We can just give our thoughts. And then as chair of the didactic board, I have discussed with your tutor and co-tutor that in case you would like to propose an abstract from your thesis to be published in a working paper series, we can of course consider this.
Yeah, sure. We'll talk about it.
There's no hurry, but anyway, let us know.
It would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Can I take my work back? Yeah, I don't know what to say.
Enjoy your time.
Enjoy your time.
Sure.
We can't hear you. Okay. Complimenti.
Grazie.
Well done. Well done.
Arrivederci. Scusate, ma qui la regia non è semplice. Abbiamo un microfono che va.
Okay.
We have only one microphone, which I need to move round. Thank you, Andrew, Marco, and Federico.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. No, very interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
And entirely publishable. I agree. I'd love to see it in print. Yeah.
Maybe even sort of piecemeal. There's aspects concerning the most specific kind of religious organizations and the institutions which could be sort of taken apart from a publication within that specific frame. For the sake of what I do, in particular, the DNet competence and stuff, that's also something which is possible. So please, Fabio, tell her that it's so rich that she might think of taking different parts of dimensions and publish those in separate journals or venues anyway.
Yeah. We will push her. We will support her.
Grazie mille.
Okay, thank you. Bye and have a nice summer.
Thank
we
you.
don't see you
Cheers,
again.
guys. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye.
Ciao, bye, grazie.
Ciao.
Ciao,
Federico, ti scrivo per il comitato per la didattica.
Va benissimo. Scusami per l'inizio, ma mi è partita la connessione,
No,
per
ma
cui...
tanto guarda, eri supplente, quindi ti ringrazio ulteriormente per esserci stato, perché normalmente i supplenti non si vedono quasi mai. Svicolano. Bene, grazie. Ciao.
Grazie.
Ciao.